There are writers you meet and instantly know this is a writer to watch, to pay attention to. Adam Ross is that writer, and lucky me, meeting him when Playworld was just released, a book that has launched him into the orbit of literary lights. For Playworld follows his debut novel, Mr. Peanut, which was critically acclaimed. Long years of writing have come home with this new work which critics have hailed as extraordinary, a beguiling ode to a lost era, and my favorite, Washington Post's Ron Charles, who proclaimed, "Playworld is so good, it will give readers hope for the year ahead." This book does give us hope, and I think we need hope now more than ever. Adam will be joined in conversation with our island's own acclaimed author, best-selling writer, Elin Hilderbrand.
Is this on? Hi, everyone. Hello. Okay, so just a little bit of background. Mary was supposed to interview Adam, and I read Adam's book in the beginning of February, and I basically said to Mary, I have to be the one to interview him. It has to be me. Please, 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 and begged her, and she very kindly agreed. I'm going to talk about the book very briefly, but I want to see a show of hands. How many of you have already read it, Playworld? Okay, so I'm going to judge maybe a third of you. You guys, this book was the best book I've read in decades. And as soon as you read it, you feel like you're reading a classic. Like you know you're reading a classic. And Tim Ehrenberg is here to tell you, I am a very picky, discerning reader, and there are a lot of things that I don't like. As soon as in the first pages, I realized this book is going to change my life. I absolutely loved every single line of it. Somewhere, I'll pitch it to you this way. It's about a child actor who starts a relationship with his mother's friend. He's 14. He is a freshman in high school. He goes to a private school in New York City. But that's really just the jumping off point. And throughout the pages, you just fall more and more in love with Griffin Hurt as he goes through all of the misadventures of his freshman year. So, Adam, anyway, the bottom line is you have to buy it. You have to read it. Adam is here to sign it after. I can't stress enough how incredible this novel is. And when I was in the first few pages, there was a line where Griffin was describing I'm going to let Adam talk, I promise. There's a line where Griffin is describing his friend's father's tasseled loafers, and he describes the tassels as tiny squid dipped in expensive chocolate. And when I read that line, I got my phone and I found Adam on Instagram and I messaged him and I said, you do not know me, but you are a genius and I'm reading your book. And when you read a line like that, you know that you're in the hands of someone who's smarter than you and really in control and an incredibly masterful writer. So, Adam Ross. So I want to start, Adam, because you have been on Nantucket before. And can you tell everybody about that?
Yeah, so I came to Nantucket, I want to say it was 1984. I was the first mate on a sailboat, which was really great for me because I didn't know anything about sailing. And we found ourselves on the island of Nantucket. I was sort of both first mate who didn't know how to do anything and the babysitter of a 2-year-old who slept in the front of the boat with me. And my most vivid memory of it is there are two things I remember. One, I got the greatest sweater of my life at Nantucket Looms, which it was one of those sweaters that lasted 20 years, and when it died, I was like, someday I'll find that sweater again. and then the other thing was, at the time, I was reading like mad, and I didn't know I had astigmatism, and I started to get cluster headaches.
Oh.
And so I've never been in pain like that, and I've been in a lot of pain. And so I rode my bike to the hospital, And the doctor said, I'm going to give you this pill. It was Percocet. He's like, don't take this pill until you get back to your boat. And that is also experience of bliss I've never been able to repeat. But yeah, that was my Nantucket story.
Okay, and as we know, Nantucket Looms is right around the corner. Likelihood that they have the snip sweater is 0, but we can all go check it out. Okay, Adam, I want to go, I love origin stories. Can you take us back to how you get to publishing your first novel? Like, what are the steps in your writing life that get you to publishing your first novel?
We're talking about Mr. Peanut.
Yes, we're talking about Mr. Peanut.
So I was somebody who went to, I wanted to be a writer from around my senior year of high school through college, and moved back to New York, was just writing, doing all sorts of jobs, whether it was like office jobs or working in nightclubs. Got into MFA school, and the novel that I was working on in MFA school turned out to be a turkey. And so then I had studied Hitchcock really intensively in college. And of course, uxoricide, wife murder, is a huge part of Hitchcock's oeuvre. And I had started a novel about a guy who may or may not have killed his wife, and he's being interrogated by these 2 detectives, and they're kind of like Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And one sort of believes he's innocent, one believes he's guilty, but it wasn't working. It was just too didactic. And then my father told me 2 stories. First, he told me about the Sam Shepard murder case, which, of course, for those of you in the audience who don't know, is what the story of The Fugitive is based on. And Sam Shepard is one of the only people in America to ever have been both convicted and exonerated of killing his wife. And so I was like, oh, here's my character. This is like the Gray Knight of wife murder. Like, this is the perfect person to have as a character. But then my father told me also about a second cousin of mine who she had a lot of things she struggled with. She was morbidly obese. She struggled with depression, and she and her husband had a very fraught marriage. And then he claimed one day she was allergic. She was allergic to peanuts, and one day he announced that she had died of anaphylactic shock, and when the police asked him what happened, he said, well, I came home, we were in a marital argument, and she took a handful of peanuts and ate them, and she had hidden her EpiPens. And then he asked my uncle for money, and when my uncle said no, he disappeared into the woodwork, never to be seen again. And I was like, this is like the story of like a perfect murder, you know what I mean? And then I was just kind of off to the races. And so Mr. Peanut is the story about a guy who may or may not have killed his wife. He's being interrogated by 2 detectives, and as the detectives get further into their investigation, they begin to see aspects of their own marriages in the prime suspects.
Yes.
So, yeah.
It is also another phenomenal book. Now, how do you get it published? So this is like procedurally, like how do you find an agent? How does that book, because it is such a specific, it's not like anything I've ever read. So how do you get it published?
So in the early days when I was writing, I had some really close calls with places like Paris Review with some of my short fiction. And when you get close calls with some of these great literary magazines, they're like, don't send your fiction anymore to this mailbox, send it to this mailbox. And so I'd send it to them, and it'd be a close call. And finally I was like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I can't like keep swinging and missing. I'm just going to finish. It was a little bit like, there was some hubris in it. It was like I'm just gonna go out and write my novel and my book of short stories, and I'll show them in 12 years. And so, and then what happened was, Mr. Peanut is a book. I've boiled it down to a good pitch, but it's a book that is very complex. It's kind of built like a Mobius strip, and it's one of those things where if you tell people about it before you have a pitch, people are like, huh? They're like, that sounds great. But then what happened was I gave it to a friend who was an agent along with 13 short stories. And I was like, look, I'm not querying you as an agent. I just need some advice. I've been working on this for like 12 years. Can you give me some advice? And he read both, and he was like, oh, we'll represent you. We'll, and then I was really fortunate because it went to Sunny Mehta and the legendary editor at Knopf, Gary Fisketjon, who's Richard Ford's editor, Richard Russo, Cormac McCarthy, Joy Williams, and they made a preemptive offer, and then the rest is history.
For both books, right? So Mr. Peanut comes out first, and then
Ladies and Gentlemen, the year after.
Yeah, and I'm going to sound like a broken record. I'm finishing Ladies and Gentlemen, the Book of Stories. You guys, it is so good. So if you're like not going to invest in a hardcover, you could buy either Mr. Peanut or Ladies and Gentlemen, and that will also be your gateway drug. The books are so good. Okay, so now I want to talk about Playworld because a fair amount of time passes between Ladies and Gentlemen and Playworld. So can you talk about that time period? Are you writing all the time?
Well, so a couple of things that happened with Playworld. So, Mr. Peanut was published all over the world, and Ladies and Gentlemen came out afterwards. So I spent like 2 years touring. Okay. These things have a oddly long tail. It's actually a strange thing about having some success as a writer, which is you've worked so hard to get time to write, and suddenly you're shilling for something you finished like a year or two ago. It's a little bit. I mean, I don't want to cry crocodile tears, but it's a little, because you want to get back to something new. And so finally, things settled down, and I'd wanted to write Playworld for a long time, but I started. What happened was I started writing about Griffin at the age of 33, and he's living in Nashville, and he's a failed screenwriter, and his life is completely falling apart. He's having this terrible day. And so I write 70 pages about Griffin having this terrible day, and it ends with him getting a gun. And it's a 3-act book in my conception. Act 1 is called Gun, Act 2 is called Playworld, and Act 3 is called The Two Towers. And so Knopf buys the first 70 pages based on a preemptive.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I'm killing it. I'm gonna go write the great American novel. And then I start to write Act 2, which is Playworld, and the novel just grinds to a halt. Huh. I am in quicksand. It is just not working. And this goes on for a year.
Okay, wait, I want to stop you because this is like my heart is palpitating. This is any writer's worst nightmare. Oh. I'm trying to think about what I would do. How great is your despair at this point?
Well, the thing is my despair is practical because like they've given me an advance, and I've bought groceries.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh boy, like how does this was not the plan.
It's so bad.
And it's terrifying. And so I go and talk to a really good friend, and I'm like, I think I got to give this advance money back. This book is dead on arrival. And my friend's like, well, tell me about it. And I'm like, well, it's about, what it was like growing up in the 80s, how we were so free and unmonitored, and our parents didn't know anything that we were doing. It was about this abusive wrestling coach. It was about being a child actor and being the only kid on set, and how, like, all these adults would tell you inappropriate things, and you just be like, yeah. And I said, but it didn't seem strange at the time.
Right.
And my friend is like, that's a really good line. And I was like, that is a good line. And I went back to my study and I wrote, the first lines of the book, which is in the fall of 1980, when I was 14, a friend of my parents named Naomi Shaw fell in love with me. She was 36, a mother of 2, and married to a wealthy man. Like so many things that happened to me that year, it didn't seem strange at the time.
Right.
And I was off to the races.
And then you were off to the races.
And I was off to a 10-year race.
Yes. Okay.
It's just boom. I was like, I'll have. I gave a reading. I gave a reading. I was a Hodder Fellow at Princeton. I gave a reading. It was like when I was like off to the races. And my agent, I read the first chapter, and my agent was like, she's British. She was like, oh my God. She's like, this was wonderful. She's like, when will you be done? I'm like, a year. I'll be done in a year. But look, what happened was in 2015, I started interviewing for the Sewanee Review job.
Right.
I'm the editor of the Sewanee Review, which is America's oldest literary magazine. I get the job to take over the Swanee Review in 2016 and to completely revivify it. It had gotten down to like 300 subscribers, and suddenly from like 2016 to about 2018 or 19, I'm working like 80-hour weeks.
Right.
So, and I'm raising 2 daughters.
Sure.
And I got divorced.
Yeah.
So life intervened.
It takes time. It has been billed as a semi-autobiographical novel, and I want to dig in here because, of course, the most important part of that is the semi, right? Because we are all sophisticated enough to know that if Adam wrote a novel about his actual 9th grade year, it would be so boring. Yes. Not interesting, not worthy of fiction. Okay, so what any writer, and I get this question all the time when I'm being interviewed, is, do you base your characters on real people? And it's a very complicated answer, but the answer is that no matter how bizarre and strange and sort of noteworthy things are that happen to you, you cannot directly translate them into fiction. It does not work. So can you speak to that?
Well, I like to say that Playworld rhymes with my life. And what I mean with that is, certain writers need certain things. They need to have authority over certain aspects of the story they're telling to feel like they can invent. It's this weird toggling between a sense of like lockdown command of a certain milieu or subject matter. In my case, it's kind of like setting and milieu. I was a child actor. Right. I did do movies and television. I did dramatic radio with my father, who was also an actor. I had some really amazing things happen. Like this one television show I did was not only shot at 8H Studios where they shoot Saturday Night Live, but was being shot there when the original cast was there. So the original cast is like blowing through. The first movie I did was with Alan Alda and Meryl Streep, and I played Alan Alda's son. So I knew what that was like. But Griffin is a very successful child actor. Now, he's a very successful New York child actor, which is a whole different thing, because remember, the species of New York actor, think about, Ann Mira and Jerry Stiller. Think about shows like Rhoda. The New York actor there was a way in which there was like a kind of like, almost kind of like progressive, ethno-expansive aspect, seeing Jewish characters, seeing characters from, grittier kinds of characters in American television. And it was funny to like grow up walking around New York with my dad sometimes, who was an actor, and we'd run into like Morgan Freeman. And Morgan Freeman at the time is on Electric Company. Yeah. And he's a buddy of my dad's, and he and my dad would like dap each other up, and Morgan would be like, man, I gotta get out of this PBS shit. He's like, this PBS, this electric company shit is killing me. And it's like if you knew what you knew then, it's like, don't worry, Morgan, soon you'll be God. But and they were all just these struggling actors who, in different kinds of ways, were at the tip of the spear of assimilation. So, like, this milieu, and I'm also, but the things that happen are just like largely invented. I mean, there are, in the case of certain things like wrestling. I mean, I was a distinguished wrestler in high school, and I don't ever mind talking about this. My cohort and I at the Trinity School were sexually abused by our wrestling coach. But and that's the kind of thing where you mention something like that, and it's like, ooh. But I worked in conjunction with Safe Sport, a watchdog group. And I tell this story because sometimes the arc of the universe does bend toward justice. I worked with this watchdog group called Safe Sport because I found out that this coach was about to be inducted into the New York State Wrestling Hall of Fame. So he had been passed from school to school for 35 years. And so because I was working on Playworld, and because I was doing what was in part a memory exercise, and because I was doing that kind of hermeneutic of memory where you'd think back to certain kids, because we weren't talking about it, and you'd be like, right. Oh, that's what was happening to that kid too.
Also, right.
Then I could reach out to kids that I didn't know, In fact, I'll tell one really amazing story about that, because it does in some ways apply to Playworld. You know, one of the young men in my class, who was a very distinguished middle school wrestler, became a successful actor, and he wasn't a friend of mine. And when I was working with Safe Sport, I reached out to him. I hadn't spoken to him in 35 years, and I call him and I'm like, "Hey, John, it's Adam. How are you? Congratulations on all your success. I've been following your career." And he said, "Hey, Adam, how are you? Congratulations on your success. I've been following your career." And I said, "I think you know why I'm calling." And he goes, "I know exactly why you're calling." And I was like, "You were abused as well." Anyway, the point is that some of the things that happen in Playworld, they didn't happen to me, but they are either an invention on what I knew was happening or an amalgamation of things that were happening. And it was a way, again, of talking, because we can get into this, it was a way in some ways about talking about the politics of the era and adults and children and some of the language we lacked about certain experiences in that era.
Right. I mean, let me put a pin in that for 1 second. The wrestling sections of Playworld are so incredible. I don't even have vocabulary at my disposal to tell you how good they are. And in my, reading, the only person who'd ever really done wrestling was John Irving. And Adam does it so much better, truly. But there is a wrestling coach, and we don't want to give it too much away, but his wrestling coach is sexually abusing him and the other kids at the school. And it's the stoicism with which Griffin handles it that makes it so, extra horrible. And as I read on, I kept thinking, is this guy gonna get, his just dessert? But the thing is, and also thinking like, why wasn't Griffin telling anybody? Anybody who is our age, which is to say, Gen X, we didn't have phones, first of all. We didn't have words like triggering or trauma. We didn't see the things that happened to us as trauma. Those were just the things that we had to survive. And it's so different from the way our children are being raised now. And I feel like possibly they would be way more apt to speak up.
Yeah, well, so look, on the one hand, in terms of just like what Playworld is actually about, Playworld is about this 1 year in the life of a child actor, and about some things that happened to him and some happened to his family, some very consequential things. End of the Carter administration, beginning of the Reagan administration. And so in a very granular way, it takes you through this year. But there's another thing that it's about, and it's sort of a twofold thing. I was really interested in how in an attention-starved economy, which was our childhood, right? Where we had so much freedom and a weird kind of benign neglect by our parents, for which I don't blame them. It was the way in which you were parented. It was at a time when we didn't have some of this therapeutic / warning language about certain kinds of predation, certain kinds of abuse, lack of boundaries. I love to talk about this all the time. It's like, I have a 19-year-old and 18-year-old daughter, and, they'll be like, "Dad, I broke up with him." And I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry you broke up with him. What happened?" She was like, "He was just treating me badly and I had to throw up a boundary." And I'm like, "Boundary? Like what?" I'm like, "What? What's a boundary?" And they explain it to me. But then, of course, there's just like the recognizable aspect of childhood, which is structural, which is not having language for what adults are doing and what you're seeing and how you subsequently process that. This is a long-winded way of saying that Playworld wanted to look at what it meant to be of that generation vis-a-vis some of these things that happen. A kid who has to, because he lacks some of this language, just has to keep moving through these experiences without stopping. But it's also kind of political. And the reason it's political, and this is always fascinating to me, because I did a lot of research about it, is, we talk about things right now like the debt in this country. We're talking, the debt's completely out of control, the debt. Well, when Ronald Reagan took office, the debt in this country was $900 million. And then Reagan passes the Kemp-Roth Act, which is one of the biggest changes to the tax code in American history. And so when Reagan leaves office, the debt is $2 trillion. And what's fascinating is that we've actually, I don't bring that up because I'm on either side of that conversation. It's just that we've been having the same conversation about tax policy since then. And we're having it right now. And I mention that also because in Playworld, the adults and how they parent stand in for the political sphere. They stand in for the political sphere. Because there was something about the 80s and that get mine now ethos and the I'll pay for it later if I pay for it at all. That was really born in that time. And in the era of the actor president who took office during a massive right-wing shift in this country, after we had a one-term Democratic president hamstrung by inflation, stagflation, when a country was tired of certain kinds of liberal policies, I just think that moment shines a light on where we are right now. And that wasn't something I intended. But as you know, and there I see many writers I admire in here, when you write a novel, there's also this kind of spooky action that happens where you start to make connections between what you're doing and what's happening in the here and now. And you can only look at it for a second. You're like, oh, this looks a lot like, you know, like,
Yeah.
you're like, don't look at that.
Right.
Don't look at that.
Yeah.
Like, you'll start to sound like a jerk, you know, so you have to stick to the story.
Right. It is, and despite all the things that we're talking about, this is a classic coming-of-age novel.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the people that you read, the people that you read, the books that influenced you, and the way you see Playworld standing among like the great coming-of-age novels of our time? Truly. Truly.
Of course. Where do I start? Let me say this. You know, people have asked me, did you have books that were models? And the answer is that I did not, because again, I wish I'd had models. Maybe it would have taken less time. But two books that were really on my mind while I was writing Playworld was Saul Bellows' The Adventures of Augie March, which is so committed, and for those of you who haven't read it, Saul Bellows' third novel. It's a torrential, amazing novel. It's really when Saul Bellow became who the Saul Bellow readers who've read him know. But it's a picaresque about a young boy growing up in Chicago, and then it extends to his early adulthood. And there's just such a commitment to rendering with such energetic beauty every aspect of Chicago itself. So man, you read that book and you feel like you can taste the L in your teeth, you know. And then another book that I was really obsessed with was Lolita. And the reason I was obsessed with Lolita is because for those of you who've read it, you know, the great trick Lolita plays on the reader is that through the scrim of Nabokov's astonishing language, you occasionally get a sense of what's happening to this poor girl, right? And I wanted to go to the other side of that scrim. But I wanted it, I was just like, you know what? I want to bring all of my game as a writer. I want to bring all of my style and all of my game, no matter how long it takes, to rendering this particular world as this particular time. And my feeling was like, if I do that, then for people like us who are Gen X, you'd be like, oh yeah, I remember that. And for people who aren't, I can be like, this is what it was like to live then. This was how time passed then.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because to me, you some people are like, oh, it's long. It's like, well, time didn't pass like it passes now. And I saw this hilarious comedian who was like, everyone, I'm Gen X and everyone talks about mindfulness. He was like, when you were growing up at my age as Gen X, like you took a bus across town, it was like mindfulness. Like, you went to the bathroom, mindfulness. You know what I mean? Like you didn't have any, you were not always trying, your attention was not preyed upon, and You were never, your attention was rarely triangulated. And so there was a way in which, I think as you probably also know, I think one of the biggest decisions you make when you write a novel is about its own time signature. Like, what's its pace? How does time pass in the novel? And look, I mean, like, you feel like you find a novel's voice, you get committed to it, you're writing about everything from the Reagan assassination to the Lenin assassination to what it's like to be in what's essentially like a Woody Allen movie. And your chapters are running about X long, and you're like, I'm in, I'm committed. Like, there's no going back now. So that's what happens.
One of the other things that I love to talk about with any writer is your choice of point of view. So now that I've read absolutely everything that you've written, and Mr. Peanut is told in an incredible sort of third person, omniscient and everything else, but you choose to do Playworld in first person, and I famously don't like first person novels. However, this one I absolutely love. But can you talk about that decision, and did you ever second guess it, or at any point during the writing of it, did you think it should be close third?
I love this question, and the reason I love this question is when you do read Playworld, if you do read Playworld, managing that first-person voice was one of the trickiest technical things to handle. Because I just recited the first lines. That is the point of telling. The point of telling in Playworld is clearly from somebody who is in the future recollecting things, but in order to render the effect that I wanted, right, of some of these events that happens to Griffin, it had to be rendered in such a way that it wasn't recollection and tranquility. So in other words, the way I like to talk about it is I would toggle between Griffin recollecting in tranquility, and at times he would be with Griffin and things happening in the moment. The way I like to compare it is, it was like walking up to an aquarium's glass, to the point where you can't see your reflection, and then crazy creatures like swim up to you. Because the experience of childhood is the experience of the sublime. It really is. And I mean the sublime in really like the romantic poet's term. And the sublime is the ineffable. It's when you don't have language for something that happens. And occasionally, Griffin future, the Griffin recollecting, will come in and rescue the reader a little bit, because messed up shit will happen. And so Griffin future needs to come in and kind of mediate that a little bit. But the choice was like, again, it was too getting to that particular effect, that particular kind of disturbance, that sublime disturbance, because otherwise I felt like if you were in third, you get 30,000 feet, right? And I will also say this, like there are a couple of sections that are sort of third person when Griffin's father kind of takes over the novel, or Griffin narrates about his parents' early stages of their marriage. But I think that's Griffin later on flexing as a writer. Yeah.
Right. So in other words, there are two narrators. One is Griffin living it, and one is Griffin looking back. But Griffin looking back does not pass judgment either, and does not comment, which is part of the magic, I think.
Well, Elin, I mean, I think. Look, I mean, I was really committed. Again, when you write a book for 10 years, you better not be paying too much attention to things, because I was writing this book through Me Too.
Yeah.
Right. And so and so there was a real effort in Playworld to explode any kind of binary thinking. Because again, when you think about your own coming of age, at least, I mean, I find this is true. Maybe people don't, but this is my opinion. When you're a kid, you kind of pastiche a self. You collage a self. And so when you're a kid, you're taking some of the best truths from the people you encounter as you can. And so Griffin, in some ways, is very non-judgmental of the people that he encounters, even some of the people who are doing him harm, because some of the people who are doing him harm are also teaching him things that are indelibly important and practical and will also save his life.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I found the narration absolutely amazing. should we switch? Let's switch a little bit. Like, can you talk about your job at the Sewanee Review?
Sure.
And not so much your job, but how being a novelist, are you in charge of reading the submissions? Do you decide what goes into the magazine? You must read an enormous amount of other people's fiction that's new writers. And can you talk a little bit about that and what that experience is like and how it influences your own work?
Listen, people ask me all the time. They're like, "Are you watching the show X?" I'm like, "I wish," because not only all I feel like all I do is read, and at night when people are watching TV, I have to read. I get to read what I want to read. But so no, my staff. I have a full-time staff of 4 people below me, and they separate the wheat from the chaff. But we also have tranches of submissions. We have agent submissions. We have direct submits from other writers. There are writers that are here at the festival who passed along stuff to me. You've got to read this. One of the first writers I published, Sadiq Fofana, was given to me by Laurie Moore, who was like, "This is the best person I've ever taught." And in these, by setting up these various tranches of submissions, you make discoveries. But I will say this, and what's been fascinating is, over the last 10 years, one of the things that happened, and you and I have experienced this, is when we were young and up-and-coming writers, when you were at Iowa, literature was vertically integrated. And by that I mean, like, there were these great writers who passed fiction down unto us like manna from heaven, and we worshiped these geniuses, and they tended to be white, and they tended to be male.
I was going to say, they tended to be dudes.
And then what happened was, in a way that I think is really beautiful and amazing, is that literature began to be much more horizontally integrated and far more polyphonic.
So interesting. Tim and I had Gilbert Cruz on our podcast in season 1, and Gilbert Cruz is the editor of the New York Times Book Review. And the New York Times Book Review is basically, has always been sort of the ultimate word in what is quality as far as literature is concerned. So Gilbert Cruz comes in, and he's a genre guy. His favorite novelist is Stephen King.
Yeah.
And he also reads every single one of my books, which I was completely shocked because I couldn't have gotten, 20 years ago, I couldn't have gotten even a mention in the New York Times because I write, what are called beach books or women's literature. That was not covered by the New York Times Book Review. And now, Gilbert Cruz says to me, because I was talking about literary fiction, and he says, "Elin, literary fiction is a genre." But when we were starting out, it was what everybody aspired to.
That's correct. And so I think, and again, I think some of the most exciting kinds of, I would argue that the explosive growth of high-level television has to do with the migration of great literary trained writers into that space, right?
So interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
Right. But back to what I was saying, one of the cool things, and not only is literature more horizontally integrated, but my staff is primarily like 20-somethings, with the exception of my managing editor. And the cool thing about that is that it doesn't work anymore that I can be a vertically integrated editor. I do have the last say. I am the decider. But my staff makes arguments for things, and sometimes, even if I don't necessarily agree with them completely, I basically allow myself, I'm like, look, they see something in this that you don't, and you need to trust that because, in that way that speaks to a broader audience, and, there are ways in which we all need wax removed from our ears.
Right. And also, you guys, you have to understand what a unicorn really the Sewanee Review is, because there aren't a lot of places where young writers, and some of you may be aspiring writers in this audience, that you can send things.
Well, it's the first place. When I look at some of the writers that we've, for instance, Sadiq Fofana, we published his first stories. He goes on, publishes stories from the tenants downstairs. He wins a Whiting Award, and he wins the Gotham Prize. You get to Charlene Bazile publishes her first story with us, and it ends up in Best American Short Stories. Like, you get to be right at the ground floor with the people who are going to be writing the next wave of American literature. And it's like, it is a thrilling job. I mean, like you're going to have to pull me away from that job. Multiple people are going to have to pull me away from that job because well, here's another reason. It's a practical reason. If those, I usually write for 2 to 3 hours in the morning. I'm an early riser. I'm a disciplined guy. And if it's a shitty morning, I get to go to my day job, put on my editor's hat, and it's a good day.
Okay, so you take as much satisfaction from that, because I would maybe not. You know what I'm saying? Because my writing is so essential to what
and that's why you're Elin Hilderbrand
makes
and I'm
me
Adam Ross.
No, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. But do you get an equal amount of is your day at the end of the day equal amount of satisfaction from editing as you do from writing?
Absolutely, because it's bigger than self.
Okay.
It's bigger than
you're
self.
nicer than me then, and more generous.
No, but it's just a cool job. I mean, it's cool to see. I just blurbed the second novel of someone whose short stories I published for the first time like 7 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome.
It's wild.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Wild.
Can we have to wrap things up, but I want to ask about, and I don't like when people ask me this question, so I can't even believe I'm doing this, but what are you working on right now? Is it something that you can talk about?
Well, I can't say who, but I'm happy to say that Playworld has been optioned for television by a really amazing person. And so I'm exec producing with that.
Okay. Yay!
And then Mr. Peanut just got optioned, and that's really exciting as a movie, so that's exciting. But I'm just going to eat popcorn and watch that. But I'm trying to decide whether I'm going to write the sequel to Playworld, because what happened was that then I looked at those pages when Griffin's 33, and I'm like, oh, it was just the wrong order. Like these are still good pages.
Yeah.
And so there's that and another novel project. Right now I'm writing short stories because it's like I just don't know if I'm ready to put on that scuba gear. But and go underwater again.
Right.
But my younger daughter's about to go to college, so I'm hoping that this one will take less time.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think it will. You'll have a little bit, marginally more time. Anyway, I just want to reiterate all 3 novels. Oh, and I want to point something out because I just am finishing the book of stories, ladies and gentlemen, and Griffin makes an appearance in that book of stories. He's in college, and I had to text Adam, and I'm like, wait, is this our Griffin? So there's a way in which all 3 novels, I mean, I've noticed other things too, because you mentioned Playworld and Mr. Peanut, and I mean, there's a way in which the works are all integrated. You cannot go wrong reading all 3 or getting any of the 3 today, because Adam is here, and I want to thank Adam Ross for coming to Nantucket and gracing the Nantucket Book Festival. Thank you, guys.